There we go. So we are now live. Hello, everybody out there. When I started this up, it says that we have we can actually broadcast for 8 hours. So I guess we're actually going to make the show an 8-hour show, because why not, right? We don't have anything else going on, right?
I might get my slippers on.
So thank you all for joining us here on Always Forward. It's Always Forward with Disha, but Disha is not here today. I am your guest host, Tara Manicsic, and I'm also the program manager for Always Forward. And we try to do a show every month that's focused on something around the Node community. And I like to do kind of the dev-centered ones, talking about what us as developers are kind of interested in, what we're looking into. And for this month, that is the announcement that there is an intent of merge for the Node.js Foundation and the JavaScript Foundation. Very exciting, because I think as a JavaScript developer, I've been using JavaScript on all kinds of places, front end, back end, IoT. And we're seeing more and more of that in our communities, in our ecosystems. And we're seeing that there's just a big umbrella around JavaScript, and that we all are hoping to work together more smoothly and really kind of bridge these gaps between the different worlds of JavaScript. So that's what we're here to talk about with this amazing panel that we have today. And I would like to go ahead and have them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves, but also how they are involved in the JS Foundation or the Node Foundation, or just or the merger in general. So I think we'll go ahead and go alphabetically and start with Ben. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ben Michel. I'm known everywhere on the internets as open source with a B. And I am a developer advocate at Envision, the design prototyping tool company. We're working on an awesome app called Studio right now. And I've been in the Node community since 2011. So I've been around people for a little while, but I've been a community committee member for the last year. And I, most importantly, am now on the Joint Foundation Bootstrap team and trying to help facilitate what this merger could look like.
Nice. So alphabetically, we'll go to Chris. Yes. You know, great.
I know the alphabet. My name is Chris Hiller, and I am a developer advocate at IBM. I also maintain Mocha, the testing framework, and I'm a Node collaborator. And so I'm kind of coming at this from both ends, as Mocha's a JSF project, and you know, Node is Node. So yeah, it's maybe a kind of a different viewpoint. So I get to play both sides.
Okay, hi, my name's Dan Applequist. I am Torgo on Twitter, and for various reasons, I'm coming to you from London. I am a .com refugee, that's why I'm over here. But my current role is I work for Samsung, and I have a kind of joint job at Samsung. I'm leading the developer advocacy group for Samsung Internet, which is our browser, but I'm also leading a team which is part of our open source group, Samsung Open Source Group, which includes work on web technologies such as JavaScript. JavaScript is one of the projects that's in the JS Foundation, and I actually play the role of board member for Samsung, therefore to the JS Foundation. I also am somebody who participates in a lot of other web ecosystem things, so I've been participating in web standard stuff for years and years for different companies. Actually, I currently sit on the technical architecture group within W3C, which is a kind of architecture steering board for W3C web standards. And I also am on the advisory board, the product advisory board for NBN, which I decided to wear the NBN branding today, which is also this kind of like cross-industry board or cross-browser board that's trying to create a space for documenting the web on MDN. But anyway, that's kind of, sorry for the long intro, but that's kind of the context. And I'm really coming from outside of the Node community, so I've much more been focusing on browser side of things, and I think that's the kind of maybe point of view that I have to share in the call today, or in the thing.
Cool. I'm Maggie
Awesome.
Pint. I am a SRE manager for Microsoft. I specifically work at Microsoft on SRE for the web. So how do we make our web pages more reliable, faster? I work across all browsers and all devices. In the open source world, I'm one of the maintainers of Moment.js. And for the last year and a half, Moment being a JS Foundation project, and for the last year and a half now, I've also been the JS Foundation's representative to ECMA 2C39, working on the JavaScript language. Mostly I specialize in datetime and internationalization stuff, but I've poked at lots of proposals.
Thank you all very much. Yeah, again, I'm Tara Manicsic. I'm actually a developer advocate at Progress on the Kinvey team, and then project managing for Always Forward. So any other things you want to see on this show, feel free to ping me. But first off, I want to say not only thank you for you all being on this panel, but thank you for all the work that you've done with all of these organizations. Like, we use your stuff all the time. And so, and all of the time that you put towards this, I know me and many devs, I will speak for some devs because why not, are very appreciative of all the time and effort you put into this. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about was the kind of the overarching decision for that intent to merge, and kind of start out with the fundamentals, because I know with everybody being very excited about this announcement, there were questions, kind of elementary questions of like, oh, so what are these foundations? Like, do we all have a good grasp of what these foundations are? So I'd like to talk about three things: what the Node Foundation is, what the JS Foundation is, and why the decision to merge came about. So does anybody feel like they would like to tackle what the Node Foundation is? Ben?
I can take a crack at it. So I just actually found this out today, that the Linux Foundation is contracted by the Node Foundation to act as a logistical operator for it and other things. I didn't know that. That's pretty, today I learned. So the Node Foundation is an entity. I usually like to take a step back to like why things happened when I talk about stuff. So I think like maybe the best way to think about it, why we have a Node Foundation, goes back to the IO.js fork days when Node was owned by a singular company, and the community wasn't so happy with that and decided to fork. So there was greater community representation. Thank you, Michael, and other people who help bring Node to the community. And yeah, so the Node.js Foundation is essentially a way to keep Node.js organized and governed, owned and operated by the community, held accountable to the community, have consensus from the community to make decisions that affect everyone who use Node, and just not to be monopolized by a single entity. Yeah, so basically like a organizational wrapper around the existing open source project that is Node, that everybody helps contribute to.
Nice, thank you. That's a great history lesson and summary of the Node Foundation. Does anybody want to jump into a description of the JS Foundation?
I can take that one if it's okay. So the JS Foundation was created to support critical path projects in the JavaScript ecosystem. So I'm going to sound really boring here because I work for the enterprise. But from the enterprise's perspective, anytime you're interacting with open source, you have a lot of legal and security concerns, and you have concerns about sustainability. And when you have projects that are critical path used all over the place in your code, you're going to start asking yourself, like, hey, what happens if everyone quits? What happens if they suddenly change their license? What happens if there's copyright infringement? What happens if there's a security bug or a critical security issue? And the JS Foundation is in the position to step in for all of the projects that are under the JS Foundation to provide support for things like trademarks, legal issues. This actually happened to Moment.js, that someone was like copying our trademark, and JS Foundation had to send a lawyer to get it to stop, and it was very bad. So things like legal and trademark law, copyright law, support, community support. So JS Foundation has been really wonderful to support me driving the work on TC39 to improve our date time in JavaScript at the language level. Gotten out to quite a few conferences and been able to meet some of my fellow Moment maintainers in person thanks to the JS Foundation. So very appreciative of that. But basically, every open source library has its own sort of business, and the JS Foundation fills in the cracks on the business stuff that you as a developer team don't want to do. And I think we sometimes forget that foundations have a huge role in that, like, lawyers and marketing and trademarks area.
Well, that's like a lot of stuff too, that you just, if you want to focus on the code, the ability to have someone there focus on the business side of it that, not everybody really wants to think about or, has the skill for.
Yeah. Could I add something as well? I mean, I think along that same line, another area that foundations play a role in, or at least that we're keen in JS Foundation and in the bootstrap process as well for the merge foundation, or the proposed merge foundation, for them to play a role in, is things like codes of conduct.
Yep.
And which kind of come under more kind of governance, but aren't necessarily a business topic. One of the things that we're very keen on within the members of the Bootstrap committee is making sure that when we are coming up with a new structure, that we are putting things like diversity and inclusion and codes of conduct, enforcement policy, kind of at the forefront of our thinking there as well. So that's another kind of area where I think foundations like this have a very important role to play.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And so very important, especially as, like, I'm sure been like in ComCom, where you got to remember just how big of a role community and the whole human aspect of coding plays in all of these things. And so in general, I think I said a bit at the top of the show about how the ecosystem of JavaScript in general is growing, and what we think of as Node developers isn't what we used to think of Node developers as. Like, in the beginning, we kind of thought of Node developers staying on the back end a bit, to be honest. But now people are using Node for so much more that it starts to kind of be overarching or overflowing into different scenarios and categories like IoT. Does anybody have any points that they want to bring out about the decision to merge the JS and the Node Foundation?
I can say a boring enterprise thing again. Sorry, I totally work in enterprise open source, so I'm like, let me bring up boring enterprise stuff. One thing that I know, when you get a foundation like JS Foundation, one of your first objectives to support those lawyers and the community building and the conference travel and blah 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 is to get enterprises to give you money to continue that funding. And you know, I'm good friends with Chris Borchers, the former AD of JS Foundation, and he and I have talked about this funding issue a lot because, of course, it was like the first thing at the top of Chris's head. And when you have a foundation like JS Foundation, where you get these projects that are, relatively speaking, small, but extremely critical path regardless, the story that you tell to the enterprise for fundraising is a little complex, because they sort of look and they say, well, if there were no Moment.js, I'd grab a dev for about 3 weeks and I'd have them make Moment.js. And I think that became kind of a struggle with JS Foundation. All of the projects together, like if all of the projects died in one day, it would be horrible and nobody could do anything. But it was this collection of little pieces. And that's a hard sell when you want to say, you know, buy in. And I think a huge benefit to this merger, even though it's kind of a sort of cold one, is people buy into Node. Node is an anchor project that enterprises look at and they say, that's critical path infrastructure for me, and God help me if it dies. And that can really only benefit the projects that are in JS Foundation that maybe are a harder sell to the enterprise. So I think that's a factor in the merger. Hopefully the bigger factor in the merger is that we can create an absolutely amazing JavaScript community that converges these projects with each other. But definitely, I think that's one of the factors that you can't ignore.
Yeah,
I definitely love that last one, but I know that it's huge for enterprises to commit to open source projects when they feel like they need more reliability. And I think that's one of the hardest struggles between enterprise and open source, is having that kind of commitment and knowing that they can really rely on an open source project.
Yeah.
I was going to say on the on the community side of things too, I think the general view is that it's going to be an amazing opportunity to create unity and ubiquity across these different organizations and projects and structures, and that I think it will only serve us all well to not silo more, but to continue to merge together so that our best practices and governances and learning from our technical steering committees can facilitate a solid foundation that will make us sustain for decades, hopefully.
On a more pragmatic note, maybe I think there was a question within some enterprises about, okay, well, there's the Node Foundation and there's the JS Foundation. I don't want to pay dues on both of these foundations. And, so from that end, I think it makes sense for the the enterprises that give to the Node Foundation, the JS Foundation, to come together and try to get everything under one hood. As far as I understood, it didn't seem there were large enterprises that contributed to both. I know Samsung was one in the JSF, and maybe I'm wrong here, but it just kind of didn't make sense from a dollars and cents point of view. And so, I think that's one of the drivers as well.
And I think the other thing is that there are projects out there that are potentially looking to, join some kind of governance organization like this, and they're looking, and they may have a foot in both camps, right? Maybe they're a project that is that's relevant to the Node community and also to the rest of the JS community, right? And so those projects are looking at this and saying, well, which should I join? And JS Foundation was set up from the beginning, well, through the merger of the Node Dojo and jQuery Foundation, to kind of be a collector, or be a framework where large and small projects could coexist and could work and could sit underneath this same governance model. I think Node has traditionally been one kind of large project, right? With maybe a few smaller things around. So there are definitely like what I think what both foundations bring to the table is something complementary that the sum could be greater than the parts, basically. That's, and the other thing is in service of that it all is really in service of the web ecosystem, right? And that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about, is that if you look at the greater web ecosystem, Node is a huge part of it. Front-end technologies are a huge part of it. Things like IoT are becoming a huge part of it as well. And all of these are using JavaScript and contributing to JavaScript and are key infrastructure pieces that are making use of JavaScript. And there's stuff that can be, I don't want to use this word, but there's synergies, sorry, that are between these projects, which can be a positive thing.
Does that mean as long as you didn't say synergistic? That's the one that always to me.
Well, we could leverage that synergy proactively, and then that would be much better.
But that actually brings me into one of the next things I want to talk about, where I think to help people understand what the actual goals of the merger would be. And I know that there are about five isolated goals in particular, and kind of what you were talking about is this goal of kind of enabling more a widespread adoption, and I think it's accelerated development of JavaScript and key ecosystem projects across connected devices and servers and networks and runtimes and whatnot. So I wondered what your thoughts were on that, of why it was a goal, and Chris, have you seen that? Chris and Maggie, have you seen that with your projects in the JS Foundation so far? Is it a staring contest of who's gonna talk about it first?
You go first.
So yeah, Maggie, with Moment.js, have you seen this kind of goal with Moment.js, and that kind of the help with adoption, accelerated development, and stuff like that?
So I think definitely there's help with presence. Like I said, I've been able to get personally out into the community more. I think Moment sits at a spot in software. Well, the reason you saw kind of reluctance for me to to answer that is that Moment sits in a spot in software development lifecycle where we're not really looking. Nobody on the Moment team is what we need today is more users. Most of us are looking in the direction of the reason this library exists in the first place is that the language level support is lousy. This library, this is a good little library. Moment as a library could be a 99 Civic that's still running. You're what a good little thing you are, being old and on your old tech stack and with your old stuff.
You're fixing a problem. It's good.
Yeah, and you're still running. And I think most of us on the Moment team are really looking more forward towards what can we do at the language level. So in that sense, the foundation absolutely came through with exactly what we needed, which was to have me go fix this at language level. But I don't think any of us are really focused right now on adding contributors or driving adoption. We have tons of adoption. We have plenty of contributors, and we're more focused on what's the end state for a library like this that has been around for so long. And so our focus is more on a clean next generation of datetime and JavaScript.
Well, I think one of the other sort of goals that we've been talking about a lot is, and I think you kind of touched on it when you talked about TC39, is a contribution into standards and into the standards ecosystem and into the core language features, right? So are there here's a whole bunch of contributors to a whole bunch of different projects that are in different domain spaces that are working with the JavaScript language and are working with it to provide some kind of value to other developers, right? To people that are actually building stuff. And there's a lot of domain expertise that gets built up. So there are a number of IoT projects, for instance, in the JS Foundation. And what could we, right now there's no, what the JS Foundation or what the proposed merge foundation could do is to bring, is to make it easier for those people to funnel their contributions up into TC39 or other applicable standards bodies. So some of these APIs get standardized in what, WG or in W3C or other places. And having a clear communication channel there between all of these projects and the standards world, I think makes a lot of sense. So that's another kind of goal for the whole thing.
That gets complicated though. Sorry to just like kind of rattle off on something, but having kind of sat in that channel spot for JS Foundation for the last year and a half, I do my best to reach out to project maintainers and hear about, what they're thinking about and what they want to get driven. I will note, and maybe this is digressing a bit from the core topic, that that's a difficult position for the rep to be in, because what tends to happen with TC39 is I have an understanding of what the committee will sort of accept or want, or how to process things through the committee. And the project maintainers who aren't necessarily involved with the committee every day don't necessarily have that understanding, because standards committees are actually very complicated bodies. And so there's a lot of work, and maybe this is something that we should be thinking about working together on moving forward to clean up, but there's a lot of work in kind of helping explain to people, like, I hear what you're saying, I hear why you want this in the standard, I hear why you want this way. Here's the list of things on the table as someone who goes every time, as I understand it, and why we're going to have to refine what you're talking about here. And that's actually a really complicated thing to explain to people.
It is. I mean, I think one of the things, not to noodle on this too long, but one of the ways that a foundation or somebody assigned to work on this in a foundation could help is by demystifying some of this work that happens in standards. So very often the discussions that are going on about a particular new language feature or a particular new API or a new standard are actually happening on in some GitHub issues registry that is just sitting over, on GitHub in the same GitHub that the open source, the particular open source project is, where the people in that are maintaining that may have information or data that's relevant to the discussion over here. And I think connecting those can sometimes be really valuable, because you get people's feedback. Well, no, that doesn't actually make sense at all, because the information that we have, or the data that we have, or the feedback that we've had from our developers is this, right? And that's where I'm hoping that we can drive more contribution. But I totally agree with your point. It can be difficult.
And it's funny because I think I've seen that a lot in just the fact of going on, the Node repos on things that I've been concerned about, and just seeing all the people there who are working on it, and where I'm sitting here thinking, like, why haven't we done anything with this yet? And then you go in and hear all the different use cases and scenarios where it's just like, wow, that is way more complicated than I would have thought it would be. And that kind of actually brings us to another one of the goals of the merger. And that's so I'll just read it. It's like supporting a vision of sustainable participation and technical contribution to support productive, diverse, and inclusive communities. So can anybody talk to that in a bit?
I was just going to make one point. I was thinking sort of along those lines, is that one thing that we have a chance to do, the context in different, so like I'm thinking in terms of like Node, the project, And the context on different sides of Node is going to be different as far as how easy it is and accessible it is, for people to come and to contribute. Technically, contributing to Node is not that difficult. There's some great resources out there to do it. But when you get into governance and community committee and things that, where people are ironically working hard to make things simpler, it can be more difficult because we've adopted these governance models and documents that we live with and that we work with, which may or may not keep us from being more or less effective. And I feel like in the Node community committee, at least, this merger for that entity, this merger is a great opportunity to sort of revisit and make less of a wall or barrier to entry through having to wade through a bunch of governances and things. I mean, obviously we need governance, but just to make things less bloated, I suppose.
I think one thing you have to keep in mind with JavaScript at all times is that we are the biggest community. This size of a developer community has not been tried before. Linux has a large community around it, but as far as actual contributors, actual committers, actual people coming in and driving governance, I believe that we're a bit bigger if you roll up all of the JavaScript ecosystem. And so that puts you in positions, you're talking about trying to make it simpler, trying to cut down bulk, blah, 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 blah. Just keep in mind that we're doing something that really hasn't been done quite at this scale before.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it even more exciting. On that note, totally, it makes it even more exciting that we have a chance to really get it more right. As far as barrier to entry with people who want to jump in as quick as they can.
Yep, absolutely. That's something, by the way, that I work a lot at work on open source community building. That's about 50% of my job. 50% of it is on SRE for web. And it's actually incredible how well the JavaScript community at large, not just Node, all of the projects that I work with in the JavaScript space, make a really strong commitment to lowering the barrier to entry. People can contribute and we find a way to make it happen. Not every open source community is that way or even close. Or not every part of the open source community is probably the better way for me to put it. And lots of parts of the open source community are kind of exclusivist and you have to earn your way in and blah, 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 blah. So it's a cool thing to see JavaScript move so far in the direction of inclusion.
Totally. And I kind of came out of being young. When I was young, I didn't have money to buy an operating system myself. So I got into Linux. And then, I realized, or I just have this deep love for that. Don't have money. I'm just going to get some fast software and make something work. But I was recently talking with people from Red Hat, and I was like, so how much crossover is there between these different projects? Red Hat versus things that are going on at Canonical, and Ubuntu and that sort of thing. They're like, there's none. Everything is a silo, and
yep.
I feel like we in this merger, the more that I'm realizing and building on what you're saying, we in this merger have an opportunity to create a not to quote In Excess, but a new foundation for how we can collaborate effectively and bring people in effectively, depending on whatever context they want to join in. We haven't had this size of community before to do that with, and it's really exciting to break away from some of the the older cruft or stodginess of the siloing and make something inclusive.
Very true. So the other goals that I've seen on the table for this merger are things like that Chris had mentioned earlier, basically eliminating the confusion around, which foundation should cover what, and where basically kind of making it more unified and figuring out the budget and technical overhead of having the two different foundations. So I kind of want to bring us into this section of what each of you are looking forward to the most from the merger. And I know, Chris, you kind of live in both of the worlds. So what was exciting for you about hearing, if it was exciting for you about hearing about this intent to merger?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I was necessarily excited. So I wouldn't say that I was like, it was bad news and I felt bad or anything like that. I think there's a lot of very cautious optimism amongst especially JSF project owners about this merger. I felt like a lot of project owners didn't really like kind of the way things went with the JSF, and they are looking for this merger as a way to kind of turn over a new leaf. And for me especially, I'm not too involved in these talks, and frankly, I don't really want to be too involved. But I do want to get my 2 cents in as far as this is what I've experienced, this is what I've seen, and if there's something in the the governance proposals that the JSF project had, the JSF Foundation had problems with, maybe I can make a suggestion to avoid those problems. So that's kind of I want to help make it a better solution for everybody. I'm not too worried about Node. Node it's a great project and it's well run, and I think Node's going to be okay at the end of the day, regardless of what sort of a structure eventually appears. But mostly it's just I think we have an opportunity to really improve things for many of the projects in the JSF.
I think one of the things that I'm looking forward to is well, we alluded to it earlier about the you talked about the goals, foundation goals. I mean, one of the things that we when Miles, Sarah, and Novotny and I kind of sat down or sat virtually down and talked about what a vision, a mission could be for a joint foundation, right? And we were all extremely passionate about this idea that if we're starting something new, that now is the right time to put diversity and inclusion at the very core of the foundation, and that then things follow on from that. So then we have, if we understand that one of the goals of the foundation is to promote a diverse and inclusive and participation, then it makes it clear that the foundation should be providing mechanisms for that, and the foundation should be providing help to projects in order to help them be more inclusive and diverse. And the foundation should potentially be helping provide mediators, is one thing that we've been talking about. If there are escalation issues that come out of codes of conduct violations, and so I'm looking forward to kind of designing some of that stuff and actually putting some teeth into that. So the whole idea of us putting diversity and inclusion, diverse and inclusive participation at the core is to provide a covering for us to actually to put some real functions into the foundation that can deliver on that promise. And that's one of the things that I'm most excited about. I think also one of the things that we talked about in subsequent discussions has been about making the foundation more global. I'm sat here in London, but I'm an American voice, right? And so I barely count for like global participation. There's a huge European JS community. There's a huge Asian JS community. There's a huge South American JS community. How can we bring more participation from those communities? There's a huge African JS community, by the way, as well. How can we bring more participation from those communities into the greater whole? And that's something that I think we can do better. We're better placed to do it as one foundation. So yeah, that's something that I think we can also help with.
I feel like that's so hugely important, and it's like, people are always saying coding isn't difficult, people are difficult, but it's also like, yeah, we're sitting here writing code and we may be thinking about the code that we're writing, but it's really so many humans involved in it, and just making a great community in general where everybody feels welcome, everybody feels safe, then really basically gives us more of a good foundation to bring more creativity and code into an open community. And I think that's super important, and it's really exciting that that's one of the center goals of this merger.
And you get better technical decisions out of that kind of process as well, and that's the point. You get you end up with something that takes into account the needs of diverse communities. A tried and true example is bandwidth and memory footprint on devices. So if you're dealing with mobile devices like this, these very high spec devices, right? But those are not that kind of device is not available everywhere in the world. So when you are dealing with a technology that needs to run on that kind of device, either in a browser or in some other context, then you've got to take into account. You got to take that into account, and you can better do that when you involve the local communities or people who actually feel that pain.
I was just going to say some random note that there's actually a Hidden Brain episode on global diversity and how it affects scientific research papers, and just how there were more technical papers written in a more globally diverse group. Just FYI.
That's awesome. Dan, I was just going to say, and even on the flip side of that context, there are places that I've personally been to in Africa where phones are people's only means of connection. So like having a small device with a small physical footprint allows them to stay connected, and that's just getting people from all contexts, like that you said, getting beyond the majority of the English-speaking language, the community that speaks mostly English or whatnot is going to be hugely important. And that's why I'm so thankful for people like Maggie, and I've tried to do some internationalization work with the community and stuff like that. But just bringing people in, I think, it ties into the lower barrier to entry. How does that look like to get people in from these communities that are really underrepresented? And how can we facilitate the conversation that will set that up?
So that kind of brings me, I want to make sure we cover this topic in this last section of what this merger means for devs. So just focusing first on projects, like what current and future projects, like how they will be affected. Are there any viewpoints, Maggie, that you think of that you would like to bring to attention about how your project, I know we talked a bit about Node.js and how it was affected for good. Are there any other points that you'd like to bring up about that?
About Moment specifically?
Any
or
project
about how this affects developers? With Moment specifically, like I said, I'm not super worried, but Moments in this project lifecycle where we're more looking at new horizons for an old friend than anything else. I think I think for the project developers, probably the best benefit that can come out of this is some of the representation in standard space and some of the governance assistance that they might get. I think for developers in the broader community, like non-contributors, the best outcome of this is nothing. Like the best outcome of this is more inclusion over time for sure. But the best outcome of this is that actually everything is going pretty well. I think this is more something that affects the contributors to the projects than the broader developer community per se. Other than that, hopefully we can increase inclusion. But you're still going to npm install the same at the end, or better, maybe with a flatter file structure. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I hope for, is like the ripple effect, where our decisions, like affect the community to make the tools better. But on the side of folks that are not directly contributing, like that, it's not much difference at the end of the day. Yeah.
I think sorry, go ahead.
I think it's worth calling out that if the foundation continues to provide the legal support and the financial support for things, like I said, all the boring stuff, lawyers and trademark and marketing, that's net benefit to every developer out there. Because if you've ever worked in enterprise, it like the enterprise cares a lot that be in order. So as long as the foundation, like I guess what I want to say is, don't knock the baseline of a foundation. Foundations from day one came to provide that sort of support, copyright and legal and trademark and blah, 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 blah. And as long as that continues to hold steady for these projects, that's a substantial benefit to every developer who doesn't have to worry about it. A lot of enterprises greenlight projects by foundation. Like Microsoft has greenlight lists for contribution. You can contribute to JS Foundation. You can contribute to Apache. So, it keeps making your life easier that way. And even though that sounds boring, it's actually like really annoying if that isn't in place.
You kind of want that to be boring, because then it's something you don't have to worry about.
Right, exactly.
I think it could be a good time to talk about things in the project life cycle for projects that are coming on board, and how we're trying to facilitate them coming on. And
before we get to that, though, Dan, what was the point that you were?
I was just going to mention that the foundation can also provide support for contributors to attend things and to come to meetings and stuff like that, which can be really important. And again, it's another one of those foundational things. That's all.
Sorry, I did not mean to cut you off.
That's okay.
No, it's totally fine, because that's actually, you're right, Ben. I think as a developer and as people who are looking to contribute or want to contribute, the project lifecycle, I think, is very interesting. What the project lifecycle that they are currently working on, right? Nothing is set in stone yet.
Yeah, so like you said, there are different stages that are happening right now, and the only things that are beyond, actually no, I think we're mostly at stage 0 at this point, but things we're working on right now in a broad sense are agreeing on our general governance structure and getting to draft bylaws and that sort of thing. But I think why I started to jump ahead was because it led right into the, we were talking about how the community doesn't really affect the user community, but the people who want to contribute are, going to have an even more awesome opportunity through some of the staging or the kind of entities that we're creating to support those projects. And the monikers for these are all up in the air right now. I feel like, but we have, the incubator and the sandbox and what's being called Commons.js and, incubation. I'm just saying this for people who haven't read up on this yet, but the incubation is entities that are on their way and they want to become a part of the foundation, a top-level project, how we can support them in that. Sandboxing would be a place for neighboring projects to exist that are, can be supported by the foundation, but not necessarily are on their way to become a top-level project. And then our Commons.js is initiatives that revolve sort of around the foundation universe, and that we care about and support and mutually support each other. Like I said, these are sort of all at stage 0, and we're sort of in the ideation phase of making, what these even are. But it's really exciting that we've kind of come to a place where, these are being defined mutually from people in the JSF and in Node, and trying to agree on what those are going to look like.
A lot of this is happening also. The discussion about all this stuff is happening in public, really. So that the Bootstrap committee is meeting, and all of the minutes and all the issues that are being discussed are on GitHub. The calls that we have are broadcast on YouTube, right? So it's all of this stuff is happening in the public. I think that's also worth saying. I think that the other thing that I wanted that stuff that might be happening in what's referred to, or what been called the sandbox or Commons.js, is sometimes stuff that people talk about like JavaScript utilities, things that are important, key, crucial things for the JavaScript ecosystem, but are kind of small and have a small maintainer community, and maybe aren't, that high profile, but is nevertheless something that we want to have kind of sat there and benefit from all this governance and consistency and that kind of thing.
I will note too, I have been watching some of these Bootstrap meetings, and I highly recommend, if you're interested in what's going on with the merger, to tune into these, because not only is it interesting to see how much goes into it, but the fact of you have people raising their voice for certain things and paying a lot of attention to things, that it's really nice to know that people are caring and putting the time into these aspects of the merger. And so it's worth looking at the meetings and listening to the going-ons of the different meetings as well. And also to remember that some of the names of these things may change, because naming is hard.
We don't even know what the foundation is what the proposed new foundation is gonna be called. Right.
Can I tell you about the Smoosh API?
Oh yeah.
I'm kidding. I mean, we can bring it up again, but last September we hashed it out again. Like, should we call it Smoosh?
Naming is really hard. So if there are devs out there who are interested, or like companies or devs, anybody in general that are interested in maybe not only like watching what's going on with the merger, but maybe contributing or joining the foundation or being involved somehow, what are the best ways for people to do that?
Really quick, other people probably have other thoughts, but I honestly think right now the best way to get involved would be to still be joining up with a project that is going to be represented within this entity. So if you're going to, if you really care about Node, do Node stuff. If you really care about Mocha, go work with Chris on stuff. Like get involved that way, and then see how you can, get in the conversation, because that's where all the tribal knowledge is. That's where all the things that you need to know are in order to help facilitate this discussion. I mean, things being stage 0, we're at this place where, we really are just like our entities talking right now, like about creating this higher level thing. So I feel like the best place to be is just to get involved with the entities that are doing that.
Jory Burson is online, and she +1 what Ben said, just so everybody knows.
Hi, Jory.
You're awesome, Jory.
So is anybody else has any input on people getting involved?
Yeah, I'll second what Ben said. I think that's probably the best place to start. And I'm sure somewhere you probably use one of the projects, and it's important to use a project you contribute to. So just pick one and go for it.
So I want to close this out so that we end in a timely manner. And if there's any other things that you want to jump in and say, feel free. And I also want to get some input from all of you at the end of this show. Basically, if we could go in alphabetical order again, since we were so good at the intros. Just if you have any things that either you're working on, or any projects, or any things even non-technical that you're excited about, if you would want to sign off, let people know your name, where to find you, and any picks you may have for this month. Ben, you're first. And you're muted.
Oh, here I am. Okay. Again, I'm Ben Michel. Open source with a B on the web, everywhere. Surprisingly, it's not taken. If a new platform comes along, please don't take it. I'd like that one. So yeah, projects that are happening right now that I am really excited about. In the community committee, Tyranny just released something called Good First Issue, which is a command line tool for people to look through and stroll through things that they might want to commit. I help run PDX Node and have a lot of people coming out of code schools that are like, what do I do? I want to get involved. Well, I mean, here's a really great tool, so that's exciting. The Rich Trott, the way I got involved with Node was through his to-do site. He created this to-do site like a while ago, and he really made things accessible, and some of the contribution guides. That stuff is really great. Shout out to Lynn Clark. She's awesome. I like making the web accessible through her Mozilla Hacks blogs, and Daniel Ehrenberg. For his work on ECMA 262 and 402, the internationalization standard. Thanks for doing so much, Dan. You're awesome. And yeah, I think that's about it.
So there's a new group in Node. It's the tooling group, and so if you use or write tools using Node, typically these may be things like testing frameworks or web bundlers or compilers or whatever. We want to make Node a better platform to write tools, and so could use your input and help in the tooling group. That's github.com/Node.js/tooling. We're just getting started, so yeah, come check it out.
Okay, so I mean, one of the things that I've been, I think in the context of this discussion, I'm just most keen to make sure that we get the contributors, in particular, the contributors to the JS Foundation projects, contributing ideas and thoughts and input into the whole Bootstrap process. And so I've been reaching out to some people. My colleague Ziran, who works also in the Samsung OSG team, has also been working on this in her capacity as a member of the TAC group. And I just want to make sure that we get all the requirements on the table, and that's the thing that I'm interested in here. I think if you want to find out more about some of the work that we're doing, you can visit us at samsunginter.net. That's samsunginter.net. It's our kind of very clever URL for Samsung Internet, and follow us on Twitter at Samsung Internet as well. And there's lots of stuff that we're posting that's a general JavaScript industry or ecosystem interest, as well as browser focus kind of stuff there as well.
Okay, so if you want to find me out on the wide internet, I am at Maggie Pint, maggiepint.com. You find me by my whole name. So I'll sign up with that. Special shout outs. I want to give a special thanks to, lately my life's been extremely busy, like between my fiance and I, we have 4 kids, and I've got the job at Microsoft and stuff, and I haven't been able to move some of the stuff I've been doing with TC39 as fast as I'd like. So I want to give a big shout out to Philip Dunkel at Bloomberg, who, even though you see me at the standards committee making date time happen, it's actually Philip who is doing most of the work in the background. So big thanks to Philip. I will thank him everywhere for that. Kind of interesting shout out that I wanted to give. One of my partner teams in my same department at Microsoft just released their first open source project. It's an internal tool that we've been working on for quite a while called Measurite, and it's a way for standardizing real-time user metrics about perf. You can find it on GitHub at Microsoft/Measurite. They are just like in their first couple weeks out there in the open source space, and I know they love feedback and they're awesome to work with. So I'd give them a shout out too.
How do you spell that?
Mezzurite.
Wouldn't have expected that.
But yeah, I work with them all the time on SRE for web, talking about measuring performance, measuring SLO, service level objectives for web pages. So love those people, and definitely check out what they're doing over there.
Nice. Those are fantastic shout outs. I just want to say real quickly that last week I spoke at DevReach in Bulgaria, and I wanted to shout out, we're going to release the video soon, and I'm really excited because we had some really great speakers like Dan's coworker, Joe Franchetti, Anjana Vakil, Aisha Yunet, Jen Looper, Simona Koten, tons of people that I love watching speak. So that'll be on YouTube soon for DevReach, but amazing speakers. So I wanted to give a shout out to that. And again, you can find us at Always Forward on GitHub if there's anything that you want us to do an episode on. And you can follow me and Disha. I'm at TZManix on Twitter, and Disha is Disha, to get more updates on the Always Forward shows coming up. And again, thank you so much to our panelists. This video will be available on YouTube for everyone to watch later. And hope everybody has a great day. And thank you again, panel.
Woo! Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.